All right, so this is your government exam number 2. I knew that you could not survive without my soothing voice reading this test to you. So I'm going to read through it and give you some more background information on some of these questions. I might be going at a faster speed than if we were in person, but you have the option to pause, rewind, do whatever you need to do to take it at your pace. Okay? So the first one involves this little cartoon here. And it says the cartoon above best represents what type of nomination when running for a political office. So you've got Ross Perot coming out of the little hat, and it says, "Howdy, I'm Ross Perot, and I'm running for president." Okay? And so your options are, is this a petition, a caucus, a self-nomination, or jurisprudence? Okay? Keep in mind, he's the one saying that he's running for president. So what is that? Number 2. Number 2 uses this ballot shown above. So it says, the ballot shown above is representative of what election that caused confusion and an infamous recount. So this is from the 2000 election. Okay, and if you look at the picture, you might get some hints there. It says, is this Romney versus Obama, Gore versus Bush, Obama versus McCain, or Trump versus Clinton? So again, this is 20 years ago in 2000. Number 3. Which of the following is not required to be a registered voter in New York State? So what do you not need in order to vote? Is it residency in New York State, a valid driver's license, citizenship in the U.S., or mental competency, which is just the ability to think for yourself? Which one do you not need in order to vote? And one of them might be a little bit tricky, okay? But think about, do you need to be able to take on this task in order to vote? Number 4. Which demographic has traditionally represented the largest voting group in the U.S.? Okay, so which is the biggest group of voters? Think about what groups are voting. Who do candidates, especially Republican candidates, try to target? Is this going to be A, older white males, B, younger white males, C, middle-aged women, or D, middle-aged African Americans? It's the largest voting group in the U.S. Number 6, it says, which statement best describes the findings of voter fraud when studied by the Loyola School of Law, so Chicago University, and the Department of Justice and the Brennan Center for Justice, New York University School of Law. So it's basically saying, what do we actually know about voter fraud? Not what some very biased news sources would try to make you believe. What do we actually know? What are the real facts about voter fraud? A, laws allow more illegal citizens to create fake IDs and vote. B, it is statistically a non-issue because its occurrence is less than 1 in a million. C, every year hundreds of thousands of dead people are registered to vote. D, only Democrats have been found guilty of fraud. What are the facts? What do we actually know? Number 7, closing polling stations, invalidating college IDs, removing ballot drop boxes, and eliminating early voting hours are considered to be what? So what are politicians trying to do with these actions? Are they A, federal mandates caused by a lack of funds for voting, so they don't have enough money to have these drop boxes or have voting hours, whatever, so they can't do it? B, orders from the Federal Elections Commission, so the FEC tells them you have to, restrict your voting hours, you have to remove the drop boxes, whatever. C, attempts to suppress votes in specific demographic groups, so that's to keep people from voting if they are Black in an urban area or if they are white in a rural area. Or D, legislation from the Supreme Court related to Citizens United versus FEC. So did that court case lead to these actions? Number 8, one of the most obvious impacts of gerrymandering districts is what? So remember, gerrymandering is when politicians draw funky lines to divide up voting districts so that it will be better for them during the elections. Okay? So they might make it so that every voting district is going to swing one way. So what's the impact of this? A, the way it keeps votes fairly counted. B, how it increases voter turnout in every election. C, how it helps districts swing from Democrat control to Republican control more easily. Or D, the way it favors the incumbents of a district, so the people who were already in that position, they're running again. Number 9, according to the United States Senate Intelligence Committee's Foreign Interference Study, which combination of nations is the most known to threaten the U.S.'s free and fair elections? Which nations are trying to get their hand into our elections because they are not our biggest fans, and they want to change our results for their benefit? Is this going to be China and the Ukraine, Canada and the Dominican Republic, Mexico and Germany, or Iran and Russia? Number 10, what is the most notable and frequently achieved goal of the group known as Glavset, or the IRA? So Glavset is a Russian troll farm that interacted with Americans on social media around the times of elections. Okay, so they would pose as Americans and interact with Americans and try to change their mind. So what did they do? What was their goal? A, to create flame wars on social media. B, manipulation of citizens' voter data. C, assassination attempts on the president. Or D, stealing bank account information of politicians. What was their goal by being this troll farm? Number 11, what is the motive of fake news, according to Paul Horner? So to understand this, we need to know about Paul Horner. So he made videos about Democratic politicians that were fake or misleading, and they often went viral. Okay, and they would release these prior to elections. So what was his motive, or what was the motive of this fake news? A, to help Hillary Clinton win the 2016 election. B, to exploit and defame prominent politicians, make them look bad. C, to make money and make people look stupid. Or D, to expose the truths behind mainstream media. What's the motive of fake news? Number 12. As people become more educated through high school, college, and graduate school, they're more likely to increase the preference for which type of media to absorb the news. So what are they going to like to look at more? And what might be more difficult for someone without a college education to understand or to fully absorb? Is that going to be A, internet articles, B, radio broadcasts, C, printed books and academic journals, or D, television programs? Number 13, in the reading from Cornell University's C.C. Williams and Cizilla titled The Psychology of Fact-Checking, the idea that people of opposite political ideologies view events differently is known as what? So which choice says that people are deciding how to look at a situation or something that comes up in the news based on what their political views are? Is this called A, cognitive dissonance, B, selective perception, C, immaterial adhesion, or D, the placebo effect? Which one says that you will choose how to look at something based on what your political views already are? Number 14, in the same reading that was discussed above, the tendency of people to embrace information that supports their beliefs and reject information that contradicts them is defined as what? So which choice says that you will choose to believe something if it backs up how you already felt about the situation? Is that A, American altruism, B, confirmation bias, C, catharsis, or D, reflexive disassociation? What says that you're going to choose to believe something if it already lines up with what you believe? Number 15, what is a provisional ballot? Okay. So if there's a problem with your registration, your voter registration on election day, you might be given a provisional ballot to fill out. So what is a provisional ballot? Is it A, a vote that is contingent on or depends on the individual proving that they're eligible to vote? B, a falsely cast vote? C, an unofficial vote by an elector for the president? Or D, a ballot that's been put into an official collection box? What's a provisional ballot? All right, number 16. When a ballot is flagged for any reason, and it's reviewed by a small party of Democrats, Republicans, and an election official, it is known as what? So this is saying that during an election, sometimes a ballot is kind of questioned. They look at it and they go, I don't know about this one, if this signature is right, or if this person's name is right, or maybe they didn't give the right birth date, or something could be wrong with it. And then it needs to be reviewed by some Democrats and Republicans, an equal number, and also an election official, a nonpartisan election official. What is this known as? So I will rule out two of these. So I'm going to say it's between either A or D. Is this A, voter fraud, or D, adjudication? What is this known as? Number 17, which poll is generally considered to be the most accurate because it is more accurate and more precise in its results? Okay, I will rule out A, right? We know that polls conducted by major political parties are not going to be the most accurate. But what about, is it B, the Gallup polls, C, Pew Research polls, or D, Quinnipiac University polls? Number 18, based on the review of TickPick.com and a study from William Jessup University in California, which of the following statements is most supported by common findings? So which one of these would be most accurate? I'll give you, it's between A or D. Is it A, that conservatives are more likely to listen to country music, or D, that listeners of hip-hop are more likely to vote for Republican candidates? Which one would be most true? Number 19, which of the following is most true regarding the way public polls are conducted to analyze a politician's approval rating? So the approval rating is how much people agree with what they're doing at the time. And think about it. What might shape the way the public feels about a certain politician at a certain time? Is it A, the data is made up? B, current events may directly impact the results? C, each poll must be within 5% points of each other to be considered accurate? D, only polls conducted by the White House are considered reliable? Which one is true about polls related to approval ratings of politicians? Number 20, a sharp increase in absentee and mail-in ballots during the 2020 election is credited to what? So why were more people voting by mail? Is it because of A, a federal mandate where every voter is mailed a ballot? B, the global pandemic of COVID-19? C, Democrats suing the Supreme Court? Or D, the Voting Rights Act of 2018? Why did more people vote by mail in the last election? All right, you then have 2 short answer questions. If you need more space, take more space. I am going to read each of these, and then I'm going to suggest that you pause it, because I'm not going to wait the entire time it would take you to write it, and then start it again when you're ready for the next one. Okay. So it says, in the space to the left, create 5 equal districts where red would win the overall election. Okay, so you might want to do this with a pencil if you're not using a pencil. Or if you're on your computer, you know, you can always erase in Cami or whatever. But if you're taking this in paper, you want to put this on, use a pencil for this. You want to create 5 equal districts where red would win the overall election. This is going to be a representation of gerrymandering. So once you've done that, it says in the space below, discuss the cause and impacts of this practice. Why do certain politicians take part in gerrymandering and dividing districts like this? And what does this end up creating? Okay, we've talked about this. So just as a representative, you have those 5 equal districts where red is going to win the overall election. Okay, think of it as Republican and Democrat. So, what might be the impact of this practice? You can see in this picture that there are more blue squares than there are red squares. But if you create 5 equal districts, where red wins at least 3 of them, then you would have red winning the overall election, even though they have less voters for that party. Okay? So when you're drawing this, you want to make sure that red is going to win at least 3 of these different districts. And I'm just looking, so it's got 5, 1, 2, it's got 50 squares, okay? So you want to have about 10 squares in each one. All right. Task B. It says, Elon Musk unveils plan to put a meme on the moon by 2022. So it says the image to the left comes from BabylonBee.com, a self-identified website that produces satire. Satire is something that is like The Onion or even like SNL, where it might be posing as news, but it's not really news, it's fake. Okay? So in the space below, discuss the purpose of this type of news. Why do people put out satire? What are they trying to create? Why does Weekend Update on SNL exist? Why do some of these websites exist? You know, what are they trying to make people do? And 3 things a reader can analyze to assess reliability of a source. How can you determine if you land on a website that your great Aunt Martha linked to you on Facebook, all right, or sends to you online, and you go to it and you're trying to decide, is this a reliable source? What are some things that you can do to figure out if it's reliable? You know, what can you look at on that website itself? What can you look for on the rest of the internet? Okay, you know, what can you do to assess whether it's reliable or not? So I would pause now, so you have time to do that. All right, so now we've got a short essay question. Okay, so this is based on these 2 documents. And for this, you're going to describe the historical context surrounding these documents. So why did these documents need to be written? What was going on at the time? And then identify and explain the relationship between the events or ideas found in these documents. Cause and effect, similarity or difference, turning point. I have a feeling we're looking at similarity and difference in this one. Okay, so I'm just looking really quickly at the sources of both of these documents. So I see source, voter ID laws are good protection against fraud. So voter ID laws are good. And then the other sources oppose voter ID legislation. Fact sheet. So we should go against voter identification. So when we're talking about the historical context, we need to talk about what are voter ID laws. Okay, what do they require? You know, when are they used? And why do some people think that we need them? Why do people think that you need a voter ID law in order to have a fair election? You should also mention why some people are against them. So in the historical context, those are 3 things that you might need to talk about there. What are voter ID laws? Why do people think we need them? Why might people be against them? And then you're going to identify the relationship between these 2 events in the second paragraph. So it says in document 1, according to the 2010 census, there are 2,126,179 Kansans of voting age, people in Kansas. According to the Kansas DMV, fully 2,156,446 Kansans age 18 and older have valid driver's licenses or non-driver IDs. In other words, there are more photo IDs in circulation than there are eligible voters in Kansas. It's simply incorrect to assert that there are tens of thousands of voters in Kansas or any other state without photo ID. Photo IDs have become ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and they're unavoidable. You can't cash a check, board a plane, or drive without them. That's why it's not unreasonable to require picture identification to protect our most important privilege of citizenship. And just in case a voter lacks photo ID, Kansas's legislation requires that he or she be given one, free of charge. Photo ID requirements are a reasonable way to secure our elections. It's absurd to suggest that anyone is disenfranchised by such protective measures, so anyone is kind of held back by such protective measures. Aide Chris Kobach, a Republican from Kansas, of President Donald J. Trump's Presidential Election Committee. We're looking at all forms of election irregularities: voter fraud, voter registration fraud, voter intimidation, suppression, and looking at the vulnerabilities of the various elections we have in each of the 50 states. Okay, so think about this one. Think about, is this author for or against voter ID laws? You think they like it or no? And what are some reasons that they're giving us for their position, whether they're for or against it? Okay, document number 2. Again, this is from Oppose Voter ID Legislation. Go against it. In 2015, the state legislature granted Kobach the authority to prosecute voter fraud. 2 years later, Kobach had obtained a singular fraud conviction against a non-citizen. A far cry from the roughly 18,000 people he still claims are illegally registered to vote in Kansas. So he was given the ability to prosecute voter fraud, and he was only able to find and convict one person. Then, in 2017, Trump entrusted Kobach with a presidential commission tasked with investigating the country's election integrity. The commission was dissolved with no findings within a year. So they made a commission, they didn't find anything. They decided that the commission wasn't worth it, and so they got rid of it. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, millions of Americans lack ID. 11% of U.S. citizens, or more than 21 million Americans, do not have government-issued photo identification. Obtaining ID costs money. Even if an ID is offered for free, voters must incur numerous costs, such as paying for birth certificates, to apply for a government-issued ID. In-person fraud is vanishingly rare. A recent study found that since 2000, there were only 31 credible allegations of voter impersonation, the only type of fraud that photo IDs can prevent, during a period of time in which over 1 billion ballots were cast. So only 31 times was somebody found going to the polls and saying, hey, I am this person, and they weren't actually that person. Voter ID laws are a waste of taxpayer dollars. States incur sizable costs when implementing voter ID laws, including the cost of educating the public, training the poll workers, and providing IDs to voters. And Texas spent nearly $2 million on voter education and outreach efforts following the passage of its voter ID law. Okay. So my suggestion would be a similarity and difference, right? What's this person in document 1 saying about voter ID laws? And then what's the person in document 2 saying about voter ID laws? Okay, give some specific information. Remember to cite your documents by putting like Doc 1 or Doc 2 behind it. You could even try to find, if you picked up something in document 1 and then find something that goes directly against it in document 2. Okay, you could put them back to back, and that'll be a really good way to point out similarities and differences. All right, so paragraph 1, historical context. Paragraph 2, similarity and differences.